Right, so I'll give an even quicker introduction to GerritForge for those that don't know it. So we're a US corporation in the US since 2019. We're headquartered here in Sunnyvale, committed to open source and Gerrit since 2009, which if you do the maths, that's 15 years. So 15 years of the project. So we've been part of the project since the very beginning, I would say. Yeah, so we're hiring in the Bay also. So if anybody's interested, if you want to work more with Gerrit, if you want to do a bunch of open source contribution or see what clients and what weird setups they've all got, that's something that you could be interested, let me know. We'll also be working this year on GHS, which is our new AI tool, because if you're not doing AI at the minute, you're nobody. That is going to help people maintain their Git installation. So if you've got any like big Gerrit, GitHub even, GitLab, anything, and you need better maintenance of those repositories on the back end, then GHS is going to be the tool for you. So yeah, if you're interested in any of this, hit me up, LinkedIn, anything. Yeah, we're here. So Matthias just spoke about the migration. So I wanted to just see a bit more from the Gerrit Hub point of view. How did we make that happen and how did we handle all of that? So first of all, let's see it in action. So you can see we're on eclipse.gerrithub.io. All right. If I go in browse repositories, you can see it's a pretty neat list. You only see the Eclipse projects. Maybe I should have started from the other side actually. So if we go on GerritHub, on review.gerrithub.io, all right, and we do the same thing and we browse to repositories, there's a bunch of projects. This list goes on for quite some time. We'll talk about numbers a bit more afterwards. If I go on changes and I go on open changes, it's a pretty busy page. There's a lot of people that use actually GerritHub, more than you might think, I'm going to say. So yeah, it's a bit cluttered, right? So if I'm Eclipse Foundation users, I've always had my own installation. Obviously, I don't want to be bothered with all this noise coming from other repositories. So we provided this eclipse.gerrithub.io. So this is a new host name that was created for this. And then, as you can see here, the repositories, it's only JGit and EGit, so only Eclipse-based repositories. So if I'm an Eclipse Foundation user and I come on here, I'm not going to see anything. I'm not even going to realize that I'm on the general installation, right? And then if you go on changes, you're going to see that this is only the changes for the JGit project. I'm not having to do any extra filtering. I'm just navigating the website normally, right? Cool. So how did we make this happen? Let's introduce the VirtualHost module. So as you see, it's a module. It's not a plugin. There's a slight difference. So plugins don't really have that much access to the internals of Gerrit. So it would have not been possible to do this with a plugin. So we had to create a libModule, which has much more access to the internals of Gerrit and needs to be loaded at startup. I'm going to share these, but this is where you can find the page for the module. Essentially, it's a filter for HTTP incoming calls. So all of the HTTP calls that are incoming are going to get filtered through this filter, and that's how you see only the projects that you want. Unfortunately, it doesn't manage SSH traffic. So if you're trying to do an LS project via SSH, you're still going to be able to see all the projects, still according to ACLs, but it's not filtered by domain. So to see a bit of a more generic view, so you can have different users going to different host names, all interacting with the same Gerrit instance. Now, you could have one node serving 3 different domains if you wanted to. We don't recommend it, but it's possible. Obviously, this makes more sense once you start having a cluster and you start relying on HA and multi-site plugins that we'll see in a second. So you can have, yeah, as I just said, you can have a Gerrit primary that serves multiple hosts. Each host name can be whatever you want it to be. So if you've got different installations in your company, you can just have different websites, and then you can make it feel like you're accessing different domains. You can have more customizations as well. So for example, the nav bar, maybe I'll show it again afterwards, but the nav bar is actually different a little bit between Eclipse and Gerrit Review. You can have admin only. The milestone here is the admin only has to look after one installation. So I should have mentioned this. Obviously, this is all open source, as most of the stuff that we do. We don't really get paid or get any money from this. So it was crucial for us to have like a low maintenance installation that was not going to require a whole team of people to look just after this installation, right? So you can have one cluster. So we're using the same cluster that we were using before. So the admin only has to look after the one installation, and you've got no Snowflake setups. I don't know, like you could have, just inconsistencies that come from having multiple setups. Configuration and security is the same for all the clusters, so that's all shared across all nodes. So to see it in numbers, Gerrit Hub actually has 40,000 projects, which yeah, it's more than I expected when I saw that. And you've got 22,000 active users. That's active users, not just users registered. So yeah, the status page is going to be pretty busy. The Eclipse Foundation obviously didn't want to have all of this noise on their page, as I mentioned before. And we wanted to avoid the burden of managing a dedicated instance just for this, right? So I would say that we've achieved our goal and we've got there pretty well. How do you configure it? It's actually quite straightforward. So you're going to need a jar. So you're going to need the VirtualHost jar. Then, as I said, it's a lib. So you're going to need to position that in the lib folder in your Gerrit home. And then in Gerrit config, there's going to be two changes. One in the Gerrit bit where we configure the libModule. So we just add the juice module. The filter, so in the HTTPD section, we configure the filter for the VirtualHost. And then maybe the more interesting bit is defining where the server name goes. So you've got your default. So that is just going to see everything. Your default host is going to see everything. And then anything else is going to get matched through, and you can have a list here. You can have as many as you want. So there's the Eclipse Gerrit Hub.io. Obviously, it's only going to see Eclipse EGit and Eclipse JGit, for example, and anything that matches those patterns onward. So this is based on the project name, right? So the project names need to match the patterns, right? Main implementation points. So let's discuss those a second. Nothing much going on. Really, it's quite simple. So if we look at it, VirtualHost, there's only 8 classes, not really that many. And this is made possible by the permission backend that was introduced by Sean back in the days. And then that Luca then hijacked a bit, as he was telling me. But really all we're doing here is binding this permission backend and the canonical web URL, which we'll see in a second what that does. But we're binding the permission backend to our own VirtualHost permission backend. So there is a class that handles all the permissions. We're binding our own. And as you can see in the implementation of it, really what we're doing is we're still using the default permission backend. So we're not like reinventing the wheel. We're not redoing everything. So we're building on top of the default permission backend, adding basically what it boils down is this bit of logic. So if the plugin is not enabled, or it needs to match, so if the plugin is enabled, it needs to match your regex that you've defined, and in that case, we'll return the project. Really, the interesting bit is this. Now, for what's the virtual host? So this is going to be the canonical host name. So if I go back on here, for example, and I click on any of this repositories, I don't know, let's go on this one, whatever, repo settings, and you see here, this is review.gerrithub.io, right? So it would be a bit iffy if I went on eclipse.gerrithub.io, went here, and then went here, and I saw review.gerrithub.io, right? Here you see Eclipse, that makes sense, is what you expect, but without the canonical web URL, so without this, you would still see the review.gerrithub.io, which is not a big deal, but it's a bit inconsistent, so we fixed that as well. So what it helps with, so as I've mentioned a few times, you're going to have a more uniform user experience across your virtual domains, so the user just sees what he expects to see. There's no maintenance overhead, so if you've got 40 installations, you can boil it down to like 1, and then that's it. You don't have to have 40 different admins that look after this. And now what I really like is the improved resiliency for all domains. So someone could think that because I'm sharing the load from 40 different sites onto like the same cluster, maybe maybe I'm going to have like worse performances or anything. But it's not true if you've got like a resilient cluster with HA or multi-site setups, because you can scale the hardware. You can have still the same hardware if you want, but it's only the one cluster to look after. And then if any of the nodes goes down, the client doesn't really matter because the other nodes can serve the same host names. But it's like the user doesn't even realize that one of the nodes has gone down because the other nodes pick up the slack. And then you've got uniform configuration and the security policies across all the domains. So there's no weird things going on there. All the setups are going to be the same. And yeah, as long as you manage that one cluster properly, I should add. What it doesn't help with, so this is also can be quite interesting. So there's no data locality. So if you've got an installation in Germany and one in the USA, and you need to have certain repos only stored in certain countries, with some companies have that, can't do that. This is not the solution for you. So we will need to look at something else. No log isolation. So all of the logs for all of the domains are going to be like in one place. So I think I prefer that, but if that's something you guys don't want, then something to consider. Only, as I mentioned at the beginning, it only works over HTTP. However, even over SSH, it's still like all the ACLs still work. So you're not gonna be left out for some security gap or anything. But there is no isolation of security and configuration across domains. So what you set up needs to work for like everything. And no custom plugins. So you can't have like a plugin only on one domain, but not on the other domain, or stuff like that. So the installation needs to be like quite uniform across all of the domains. Any questions on that?
So this virtual host can work, does it work with a different version of Gerrit server? So let's say I have a 2.16, I have three more, and they are all different versions. Can I still use them?
If we have different versions of Gerrit, I guess all need to support the plugin though. Does that work? So if I've got different versions of Gerrit on different nodes, can I still install the same plugin and have this working?
Yeah, so the VirtualHost plugin actually has been developed many years ago. I believe well before NodeDB. I believe the first version possibly was on 2.12, was 2.13. So it's very well supported also by old versions. Bearing in mind that here, the point is you need to have basically a cluster of Gerrit servers serving all those domains. So in that case, you need to rely on multi-site compatibility between different versions. What we do, we make sure that every single version is compatible with the next schema version. So if you got, for instance, two versions of Gerrit with the same schema, of course, works out of the box. If you got two different versions with the subsequent schemas, they will still work. And that's the way we roll out upgrades and multi-site. And to mention what Matthias was saying, that's actually the big advantage for them to go from the Eclipse Foundation side to GitHub. Because thanks to these, we can start upgrading very early on all the sites. For instance, we are planning now the next upgrade actually to master or some of the sites. And as soon as you got new upgrades, it's very easy. You just go start upgrading some of the sites to keep some of the other sites, let's say, slightly behind. And from a virtual host perspective, you don't really see all that. That is all happening behind the scenes. Bearing in mind that you could have, if some different versions that go slightly different user experience, then people may actually sometimes see it. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, because the user experience is slower than the client. So even if it goes a slightly different REST API, sometimes you don't even see it from the client.
Yeah, I would say that the aim here is to have one consistent setup that you just uses that. But I guess if you're in a situation where you're migrating different nodes, yeah, that could come in handy. But the aim should be to converge between one setup that is the same across all nodes. It just makes it a lot easier. Any other questions?
Do you know if anyone's looking to expand this to support the SSH interfaces?
So in theory, SSH is not a problem as long as you give different ports. That's the problem, right? So it should be possible using different ports. Maybe something we can look at. And we are also welcoming contributions. Yeah, so any of you guys can also contribute to that. But the point is with SSH, you don't have the virtual host concept in the protocol itself. So you need to rely on ports. But potentially it could be done also on SSH. Why not? You're saying that there is no geolocation in the virtual host module, but actually, if you want geolocation, you can rely on multi-site. So you could define first different specific routing, preference routing for different domains. For instance, in case of Eclipse GitHub.io, we have been a little bit, let's say, not telling the truth by saying it is exactly like Review GitHub.io because we define some different geolocation routing. Because we know that Matthias is in Germany, so we gave preference to the German, let's say, site in case of Matthias, and also we were expecting a lot of traffic there. So when they go to Eclipse GitHub.io, actually the preference is more for some German sites rather than US sites. And the second thing with multi-site, you can also define if you want some geolocation constraints on the repo. So you could say, listen, this repo for legal reasons cannot really go to all sites, can go only on these sites. So this is the concept of a global repos and local repos in multi-site that can still be achieved. But you need to rely on multi-site in that case. From a virtual host perspective, it means that if you have a enough number of sites on your region that have the repo, of course, will be, say, fault tolerant. But let's say if you don't replicate everywhere and you run out of sites in your region that actually provides that repo, then you will see that your repo is not there. And that could be, let's say, disappointing from that point of view. On GitHub.io, we don't have any project that we've got geolocation restrictions. So we replicate everything everywhere. At the moment, we've got 5 different sites, but maybe if people in the Far East are interested, we could create some sites there as well. But potentially, let's say, it's not supported out of the box by the VirtualHost plugin, but it can be implemented.
All right. Cool, guys. I think that's pretty much it then. We can wrap it up. Thanks for the people attending remotely. I see you. 15 views. Not bad. All right. Have a good one. Bye, guys.